What's up? Welcome to a very special episode of Movie Schmovie. This is episode number 380. My name's Steve. I'm one of the co-hosts, and as always, I'm joined by
Ron
and John.
So this is an episode. This is a format that we've been talking about off and on the podcast for a while now, and with the release of The Flash finally in theaters this week, we thought it might be fun to do our first attempt at a tier list, where we're kind of gonna go through the DC extended universe. With, for all intents and purposes, it seems like The Flash officially, very clearly to most moviegoers, seems like it's the reset point in what's going to go forward with DC films under James Gunn and Peter Safran, even though there may be some pieces that kind of bob and weave between the two worlds. I don't know, but it seems like for what you listen to and what they talk about, that The Flash feels like a good point to say, let's look at the DC extended universe, the films that came out, 14 films that we have that we're going to kind of go through. And each of us are going to kind of place it on this tier list. You can hopefully see this if you're watching the YouTube element. If you're listening to this on your podcast, feel free to continue to listen. But if you can hop on YouTube, I'm sure you'd enjoy this episode a lot more because there's a graphic you can follow along and kind of see where we're putting these films.
Yeah.
But we'll kind of explain it to the best we can for the podcast, for the audio piece. But basically, there's
I don't even edit sound effects in anymore. I'm like, so like people are really you're not getting anything special if you're doing the audio, but except for our perfectly mixed voices. That's all.
Right. So yeah, the tier list is pretty simple. If you've seen them on the internet before, a lot of people post them, but basically we have 5 tiers. It's S, A, B, C, D. So S being some sort of superior, super, just beyond just getting an A, and then the rest of them, as it is, A, B, C, D. And these are grades, rankings, where we place these films from this universe on this tier list. We'll go through individually and place them, and then we'll average the 3 of our placements and kind of come up with an official place for that title on the tier for Movie Schmovie. Same kind of way we do our top 10s at the end of the year. We kind of have a little point system that we'll do behind the scenes as we're talking about it, just be able to place them as our average. But that's the idea. We'll see how this goes. I'm sure this is something that we can do for other franchises coming this summer, for other, we could do directors, we could do actors, we could do all kinds of fun things with this idea. But it's cool that we can do it in tandem with a review of The Flash being the last film in this extended universe. We'll do our review of that film at the end of the episode once we place The Flash on our tier list, and kind of get into what we thought about the movie, which is now in theaters finally, after much delay and production hell over the years or decades. It's there for you to check out. But did you guys have anything else you wanted to get into, say, before we jump into this list?
I actually did want to ask, just because I had to figure this out for myself, and I wondered what you guys did for this, as far as like what I had to come up with a standard on my own of like what means, the S is a little bit obvious. That's like top tier. That's like high A grade.
Yeah.
And then A, B, C, D, they aren't really the letter grades. It's more like those are the 4 quadrants. And I first started off thinking, okay, that's positive, mixed negative, negative. That was my feeling about those categories. But then I had to come up with a point system of my own little Rotten Tomatoes, Johnny's Tomatoes. I had to come up with something to just so I could understand what order my list was in if I took away the grades. Do you know what I mean? Like it had to make sense with my actual feelings about these movies. So once I figured that out, though, I figured out like a point system. So I had like, okay, anything basically that's like 50 and below is a D for me in terms of its score. Anything between 51 and 65 is category C. Anything between 66 and 80 is category B. And then category A is anything from 81 to 95. And then anything above 95 is like, that's a high A, that's S.
Man,
But
you went very deep on this.
but it made so much sense once I did it that way, because then it's like I said, then I realized it actually did scan with my, if I were to give these movies just a letter grade or a number, like between 1 and 100, a score.
Yeah.
It was like, no, that's basically, it scanned. So it gave me a certain amount of integrity with this, but some of these are high A's or high B's within that scale. So it's an interesting thing. Like what a weird thing it was for me to realize that there were this many of them, frankly, that there were 15. I just didn't think that they had done that many DCU movies until we started having this. So yeah. There was a lot of spread in my grades.
Yeah. I got to be honest here. I haven't ranked them. I haven't thought about this. I made a decision that I'm just going with my gut.
Oh, I like it.
As we hit the conversation, because I feel very strongly about some and in the other direction about others. So I want that to come through on the podcast in the moment. So
I love it.
I may live with some regrets post recording, but I'm okay with that right now.
Oh, so I'm the brain and you're the guts. Are you going to be the heart, Ronald, of this episode?
For
or the body. You're going to be the body.
I'm for sure going to be the heart, because this is all feels, especially for one of the categories. You might be surprised. I mean, some people. Maybe
I surprised myself,
Yeah,
but not too much. So how are we going to do this? We're going to start just naming a movie, and then
we're going to just go from left to right. I have
chronological order.
Right? Yeah, we have our tiles, our poster art across the bottom of our tier list, and basically they're in chronological release order. So we'll just kind of go through, and we can mix and match who wants to jump in and talk about it first. But let's just kind of jump into Man of Steel. Zack Snyder kicking off the entire DCEU, Henry Cavill as our new Clark Kent Superman. Ronald, I don't know. Why don't you kick it off? Where do you have Man of Steel?
Superior.
Okay.
Love that movie.
Yeah, tell me a little bit. Just tell me a little bit why.
It's just like, I know there's a bunch of versions of Superman. I like the brooding, big, softy, but still snap a neck sort of Superman that people got super mad about. I just thought it was fun. It felt inventive in some ways. It felt like just what I wanted out of Superman. And I know that at some point we're going to get James Gunn's version, which will probably be better. Let's be honest. Anything.
Well, you said fun. I don't know that Man of Steel is fun. I think James Gunn's version will probably be fun.
Yeah,
but Zack Snyder definitely made a real movie about with an idea about Superman, right?
It was fun to me because I like explosions.
I like buildings taken down.
Yeah, I mean that was fun to me. I mean, even though they were very cavalier about this town being demolished, like flatlined by this group of aliens, that bothered the hell out of me. But beyond that, I really thought that the destruction aspect of it, I mean, because this is his first time being Superman and experiencing things. So he's going to demolish everything. He's going to snap a neck. He's going to do all this stuff in order to gauge, what's my limits as a person? All right, I'm not going to snap any more necks. That's not going to be a thing anymore. I kind of thought that was cool.
So Superman's sort of like a guy who murders one person and then decides he's not going to kill any more people.
Yeah.
He's like not a guy who decides never to kill. No, I understand why people were bummed about, and I'll go ahead and say, for me, this movie.
Where you got this, John?
I got this in the A category. This squeaked into A for me. It was a low A, 81. But the idea of, especially now that we've seen that this didn't turn out to be this new vision of Superman that became the iconic version, I can really just look at this little pocket of Zack Snyder and more so Henry Cavill, the Superman thing. And I always liked Man of Steel as a movie. I never liked it as a take on Superman necessarily. And I don't think I ever really liked the Zack Snyder universe's take on Superman, but as a take, I guess there's a part of me that stands back and says, I appreciate that it's a take. At least it's something. I'll probably say this a bunch about the DC movies, is that sometimes it's it's something instead of nothing that they're trying to do, stylistically, character-wise, whatever. So I sometimes appreciate that even when it doesn't click for me. And this didn't really click as a Superman movie, but I liked it a lot. And I liked Henry Cavill in the role, and I was willing to accept, okay, in Zack Snyder's view, Superman has to snap a neck before he realizes not to do that. He has to flatten a city before he realizes not to do that. So it's like,
Yeah.
I didn't need that. I think a lot of Superman fans felt like they didn't need that, but I agree with you for, outside of the word fun, I think this is just a well-made movie with some cool. If you like Zack Snyder, you're gonna love the way he pulls off one of those incredible images, at least and maybe a couple or three in every movie.
Yeah.
And something tonally about like the way this movie took. I didn't necessarily want dark brooding Superman, but I liked that he was taking it seriously, and it was a stab at saying, okay, let's treat these characters like gods and icons, and I thought it felt like something rather than nothing. So yeah, I have Man of Steel in the A category.
Okay. I have Man of Steel in the A category as well. So that's gonna average out to an A. It's gonna so it'll place it on A. I feel like for some of these we can move through these a little quicker. Like we don't need to do full out reviews, but I do in general agree. Like I love Henry Cavill as Superman. I do think that a lot of Snyder kind of setting the tone for what his Snyderverse, the whole like divisiveness about how people like or don't like what he kind of started out as what this coulda, shoulda, woulda looked like. And we kind of, as we'll get through these movies, you can kind of really kind of note the mark of where things kind of take other paths, whether in the way the movies look, the way they feel, and even like really kind of in the performances of some of the characters that are in the same movies. But in general, the score is incredible. I love some of the, what I'll criticize towards a lot of these movies at the end of the tier list. I think, Snyder is definitely one of the filmmakers that is a visual effects filmmaker who, you can criticize a lot of what he does, but I do think a lot of the VFX are pretty incredible in his movies.
Mm-hmm.
And to start the universe off with such a strong effects heavy film, I think a lot of the special effects are just really great, and the action sequences are really great. And there are some sequences like the takeoff sequence, with the ground crumbling. Like these are iconic scenes for me, and I think that Man of Steel really kind of started it out really strong, and it's definitely one of my favorite movies in this DCEU conversation in general. So yeah, it's A for me. So that averages out to an A for the Movie Schmovie list. Oddly enough, this is kind of where things get weird. Like it goes from a Superman movie to a Batman versus Superman, Dawn of Justice. No real time spent with his version of Batman alone. We go
almost
right
3 years
into
later, almost 3 years later too. For audience,
just a big criticism of everything with what they did and how they handled this franchise. It's like, you kind of jumped the gun a little bit, especially when over on the other side of the world, the cinematic world, Marvel's doing their thing where, it's like breadcrumbs building to something. But yeah, so Batman v Superman, Dawn of Justice. John, where do you have this ranked?
I have this one in it squeaked into C, a low C with a 52 points. And I would say that this one, the reason why it wasn't lower for me was it has a couple of moments that I like. Outside of the reasons behind it and the resolution of it, I think the fight is kind of cool. And I love the scene, even though, again, I don't really love this whole idea of Superman being scary in this world. I love the scene of Bruce Wayne, like, witnessing the battle of Superman versus Zod and thinking, like, what the fuck am I going to do about this? I thought that was really a good way to, like, throw us in with this Ben Affleck version of Bruce Wayne that I still wish had gotten to do more in a cool movie. So, it's a C for me, a low C.
All right, I have this as a B. I too love Ben Affleck as Bruce Wayne, as Batman. I think he's pretty awesome as Batman specifically. I think just like a lot of the stuff that falls apart in the third act of the movie and some of the jokiness and a lot of the laughs that come out of the movie that are not intentional are in that third act. But I really like the opening sequence with Batman. I do like the Batman Superman fight. I love that piece that you just mentioned, John, in terms of Bruce Wayne kind of watching this whole interaction from Gotham when Man of Steel is happening, the final act of Man of Steel is happening, and kind of calculating how to handle that. So all that was really great. I do want to say I do in general the director's cut, the extended cut of this is in general, just if anybody hasn't watched it, I do think it's a lot better of a movie. But for these as individual releases, I'm gonna stick with the regular cut, and I'm gonna give this a B for me. So, Rana, where do you have it?
C.
Okay, let's see. All right, so that's gonna keep it at a C. All right. What do we got next? The next is Suicide Squad. David Ayers, Jared Leto as Joker, Margot Robbie, kind of her intro as Harley Quinn. Gotta say though, a lot of buzz around this movie. One of the best teaser trailers of a movie in a long, long time. And then the movie came out, and for me, I have Suicide Squad as a D. I feel like the trailer sold an entirely different movie, and for what comes of other movies in this universe, there's a storied conversation around studio involvement, recutting the film, different versions of the movie existing, and I feel like that's really kind of felt in the movie. I think a lot of the performances are just not good. Script is not good. It's got that painful third act mess of a climax. And the ultimate villain of the movie is, I just feel like, a complete rewrite, and you could kind of feel that wasn't the intentional way the movie was going. But I greatly dislike Suicide Squad.
Ronald?
D. Yeah, I had a similar experience. I hated the movie, but then I went to New York and I was like waiting for like a comedy audition, so we like watched it ahead of the getting in line, and the New York crowd went nuts. Like it was the greatest movie. I'm like, am I on narcotic? Like, what is happening? Am I on hallucinogens? But yeah, that movie was poorly done. It's weird to think that the guy that did Fury did this movie. I don't know what happened. And it has to be some studio interference, right? Because his pedigree is just there. Like, he makes good movies. I just don't understand how this fell so flat.
Where are you at, John?
I mean, I wish I could come to the rescue of Suicide Squad. I was wondering if I was being hard on it, and I kind of had it dancing between C and D for me until I did sort of the thought. You try to think about like what's gonna push it, what element that you remember well is gonna push it out of it. And I guess like the main thing is like the Harley Quinn piece comes out of this. Some other elements that have continued in other in other ways were sort of rescued from this, but not much really was seen as salvageable from this. And they've even kind of, I mean, it's like they rebooted this movie already, even within this 15 movie span that we're talking about. So this feels like a dead end in a lot of ways. And yeah, I gradually realized, no, I'm not remembering it poorly. It really was sort of a forgettable, on top of everything else, it just, nothing really stuck, and the things that did stick are things like like the Jared Leto's Joker and things like that were non-starters for pretty much everybody. So and I would love to have seen what this movie might have been without the meddling, maybe, but I don't, I think the efforts to do the release the Ayer cut, I feel like that feels a little bit more pointless than the Snyder cut thing was. I'm not sure we would have gotten a substantially different movie, but supposedly there is the footage that, like David Ayer makes it sound like there's a possibility of a substantially different edit. So I don't know, but it doesn't seem like what's there is all that salvageable.
So are you at a D?
Yes, I'm at a D. I was at, basically it did not squeak into C. It was like a 49.
Okay. So that's a unanimous D. What we got next is Wonder Woman. Patty Jenkins, Wonder Woman. Gal Gadot gets her own solo film after appearing in, BVS Dawn of Justice. Who wants to take this one first?
Oh,
Go ahead, Ronald.
Go ahead, Ronald.
We talked about it on an episode. What was it? 192.5 in 2017. If you want to know my opinion of it, but
okay,
it was great. So,
yeah, I got it in the A. I mean, if A for me is movies I feel positively towards, this is definitely one I'll say that about. I mean, I think that the weakness that it has is the third act villain reveal stuff. And if that's the thing that we're going to talk about with these movies, I'm not going to blame Wonder Woman for having a weak third act villain reveal when that's like almost a tradition in in superhero movies. I do think it's a weakness of the movie though, but I also think that what it has going for it, all the stuff on the island, Chris Pine coming in and being this sort of like, a secondary, like a male lead who's not the hero of the piece, all the stuff with the time, the period piece stuff, the World War I stuff. I just feel like it had a lot going for it that I still remember really fondly, even if we've talked about how Gal Gadot doesn't seem like she has a whole lot more to offer us in terms of this performance or this role. But this movie really had me, feeling positively. I have it as I've got 83.
Yeah, this is an A for me as well. This was a huge win for DC in general when this came out. Just really great direction, great score, great casting for Wonder Woman. And I do think she in these films was really good as Wonder Woman.
Yeah.
You mentioned Chris Pine, kind of as this, like, I don't know, like as like almost like a damsel in distress at times, when he's in the shadow of a figure like this. And that all just works so well. And I think the iconic sequence in the movie, the No Man's Land sequence, is just that's an all-timer, especially for this universe, this franchise of films.
Especially now that you look back and realize it still stands out,
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I do think the end of the film, again, this CG heavy third act, I think that's a pretty common criticism with all these films, and not just these, but most comic book movies, even a lot of the MCU films that I love. I would say the same thing about the final act in terms of just like just CG all over the place that just looks kind of not great. But beyond that, though, I think Wonder Woman is a standout. I think she's great in it. Chris Pine's great in it. Just a really just entertaining, all around, just awesome movie. So that's an A for the show for the ranking in general. So we've been on the same page about two movies in a row across the board. We got and then let's see where we fall for the Justice League release. This was now we have both Justice Leagues on this list since Zack Snyder's got an actual release through HBO Max a few years ago. So, but this is the original release, the one that Joss Whedon took over.
The one we've heard so many wonderful things about. The way things have gone. I'll just go ahead and say,
go ahead.
It's a D for me. I'm giving this one a D, and it's because I feel like it just has not. I mean, of all of them, it may have aged the worst. Maybe it's because we know all the stuff about the Joss Whedon thing, and then maybe it has to do with the fact that the Zack Snyder version has actually been seen now, and we can compare the two. Right. This movie just left. When I thought about it, it leaves kind of a bad taste in my mouth. Also because of the whole, it's the worst example of them trying to do the Marvel thing of like, this is their most insecure move, is bringing in Joss Whedon of all people, who did the Avengers, right, to finish this up. And I still enjoy that Joss Whedon aesthetic and the things that really clicks on. And I'm not, throwing him under the bus just because I'm not throwing his work under the bus just because we think maybe he's, a not so nice guy.
Right.
But this was at the time one that I think I was really, and I still think the reason why I have it at having 48% is that it's it's got some moments. It's got like two or three things that I do like. Right. And I can't remember how many of them were actually in the like none of the moments that I liked from this movie were in the Zack Snyder version, I don't think, but the Zack Snyder version had different moments. But at any rate, I just feel like it's a movie that I don't know that people, I don't know why someone would sit down to watch this movie. I never talked to anybody who was a huge fan of it. And it feels like maybe one of the biggest bunglings of the whole DCEU too, because this is it. This is the marquee event. You get Batman, Superman, Wonder Woman, Aquaman, like Aquaman, I kind of threw that in there, like people care. But Flash, I don't know. It just feels like it should have been this unquestionable triumph for them, and it was something they didn't properly pave the way for, and they didn't really pull off.
Yeah, yeah. I'm also at a D for Justice League. Ronald, where are you?
D.
Okay, so there we go. We got the hat trick, 3 in a row. Yeah, I just feel like I wanna like this movie more. My biggest thing I feel about a lot of the Snyderverse stuff, and even where Batman appears in the DCU, I really love Ben Affleck as Batman.
Yeah.
And there are pieces in Justice League that I really like that he is as Batman or Bruce Wayne. But as a film, as a movie, as a watching experience as a whole, just a massive, massive disappointment for what should have been an awesome thing to see for generations of comic book fans and just moviegoers in general. And it just was, left me cold. So that's a unanimous D for Justice League. Ronald, why don't you tell me what you have Aquaman at?
I have Aquaman at a B. Great movie, just wasn't an A.
You think Aquaman's great?
The first, yeah.
Okay, I'm just making sure. You said okay.
Yeah, I thought it was great. I thought it was fun. I thought it was. I've said fun for Superman because I like the destruction, but this was different because it was the Little Mermaid before the Little Mermaid came out. The live action. This is what I imagined that it would look like. Seriously.
I mean, it's the James Wan, right, aspect. I mean, it's like the action sequences that are fun and a crazy sensibility of as far as what you can bring in, like people riding seahorses, shooting lasers and stuff like that. I mean, but it's like leaning hard into that kind of mystical land under the sea. For whatever we hear about Aquaman 2 being a disaster. Now, I have this as a B as well. It's a low B for me. It's 66, but in that 66 through 80 range, anything can be in B category for me. I have it like that. Therefore, it's mixed positive, and I feel like that's generally how I feel about it. I don't know how I feel about it today, or if I'll ever rewatch it, but I'm sure that if I did, I would see, like, I remember that scene with the trench and the kind of creepy crawlies coming out of it.
Scene. Yeah.
And then there's a big chase fight scene. I guess it might be like a Greek city by the water where there's like a lot of jumping over roofs and stuff like that. That I just remember thinking,
Mantis.
That just had a fun, adventure movie feel to it at moments. So yeah, I think it's one that I did not dislike while I was watching it, and I haven't had much reason to think about it since seeing it. So
I agree. It's a B also for me. So there we go. Wow, we are killing it, guys.
That's crazy.
Holy shit, 4 in a row. All right, let's go with Shazam. John, where do you have Shazam?
I have Shazam also as a B. It's it's almost like it's so solid in terms of what it's trying to do, that I don't know. It really won me over. I remember seeing it with my son at a time when he'd already seen all the superheroes that weren't intended for kids. So he didn't necessarily need a kiddie superhero. But I think the joke of Shazam being this kind of like, slightly more comedic character, it has its own little spot in the DC EU. And I do remember it feeling like a kind of a cohesive statement. Like the little side characters were fun. So yeah, and again, I don't think I've seen it a second time. If I have, maybe I've only seen parts of it. But I've got it at I've got it reasonably high B at 77 points on my scale.
All right, I also have it as a B. Ronald, where do you have it?
I have it as a B.
Wow,
this is crazy, man.
This feels right though. This tier list so far, it may be the definitive tier list of all tier lists for DC films. We'll see where we end up. But
this is where it gets murky. I feel like it's gonna get murky at this point.
Right now, this feels really good to me, though.
Yeah, me too. Me too. Because these are all like, this is so crazy that we're so on the same page.
Yeah.
About this. Yeah.
Ronald, Birds of Prey.
C. I mean, it wasn't D. It was just kind of middle of the road, really, mediocre. That's a C
Okay.
to me, but
I got
serviceable.
I got a C as well. Again, I think the Margot Robbie of it all is the best part. I do dig what a little or a lot of what Ewan McGregor was doing in the movie as the villain.
It's his most American performance ever, Steve.
I like he can do anything, and I like
No,
him. It's
I
just,
love
it's
Ewan.
just that it's like I don't care what he does. Like,
And he's having fun
He's great.
playing a totally disgusting character, which is like he's not
Yeah.
necessarily doing. It's like it's not a great performance, but it's like it's a fun superstar performance. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, just
It's
give
a
it to
fun
me. Yeah.
swing through a campy. It's almost like they said, dial it up to 11. That's what you're supposed to do. Especially the way he's taken out is it's like
Oh yeah.
no. I have this as it's got a 64. That puts it firmly into the mixed negative. So it's a C for me, which means it's our however many that is in a row of the same category.
Guys.
Yeah, I mean, like Harley Quinn being Bugs Bunny and Margot
Right.
Robbie Robbie having that fun, like looking at the camera. Sometimes it works. I think the reason why it ranked lower for me rather than higher up, like rather than making B, was because it is kind of annoying. Like it is kind of an annoying to watch movie, sort of like the tone of it is a little too like. It's like it's not quite as funny as it thinks it is, maybe, but I think that the things it does well are those little side things we were talking about, where it feels like it's trying to hash out this separate corner of the DC universe. And not being like the world's biggest Harley Quinn fan from the comics or whatever, I've always thought that's interesting that she's sort of a character of relatively recent vintage that is huge. Like audiences know her. It's like Miles Morales having a moment over on the Spider-Man side of things. It's like, oh, it's cool. You don't have to have been around since the 60s for people to want to see you in a movie. So and I think Mary Elizabeth Winstead has a couple of nice moments in the movie. But it feels like a big cast. Chris Messina's in that too.
Oh yeah, I love Chris Messina. So what's next? We got Zack Snyder's Justice League.
Yeah, this gets murky, man. I think this is about to get murky.
Was this? Hold on, let me make sure. Was this before or after Wonder Woman 84? This is before. This was.
I have it. Birds of Prey, Wonder Woman 84. Then Zack Snyder.
So let's hold off. Hold on, I got them out of order here. So let's go with Wonder Woman 84. Okay, Ronald, where do you have Wonder Woman 84?
Squarely in the D category. One of the worst DCEU, Marvel. One of the worst Tyler Perry movies I've ever seen.
One of the worst Christmas presents my family ever received, because this
was
in the middle of the
yes, you're
things
right.
are coming out on streaming now.
Yeah,
we watched it at home on Christmas as a family, and I just shouted D. I didn't even know what I meant that day. Now I know.
It all comes out when we do
I
the
have
tier.
this is my fun fact. This is my lowest ranked movie. This had a 44% for me. I feel like this movie mishandled every asset that it had. Like Gal Gadot's not fun to watch in this movie. Fucking Pedro Pascal is not fun to watch in this movie. Like the most fun to watch actor that everybody loves in the world. Kristen Wiig can't find much to do. I mean, she could have been a fun secondary villain in the type of movie maybe they were going for, if they were going for a slightly more campy feel. But
that's true, man.
Leaning on her the way the movie does, and her having to do stuff that feels a little outside of her comfort zone, I just don't think any of it worked. I sort of give them credit for trying a different tone. And I know people that swear by this movie being kind of a fun, funky little 80s whatever. But I just feel like it just didn't nail it at all. And like I said, especially coming down from the high of the first movie, same director, you feel like this is where you really flex and you make something, really awesome. And instead it's just, they went in the wrong direction. I also think the Chris Pine of it all is a total weird element that
bad.
Can be read into in extremely negative, toxic ways. So yeah, it's a D for me.
It's a D for me, guys. We are just on the same page. Now we can talk about Zack Snyder's Justice League. HBO Max release, the Snyderverse, the restore the Snyder cut, all that good stuff. Finally, they won.
Finally
guys.
happened. The dream.
The internet
won. Idiots.
Yeah, the internet won, and they finally got it released, including additional footage shot apparently in somebody's driveway or garage.
Yeah, the people that said release the Snyder cut, they didn't say release the Snyder cut asterisk. but spend about 70 or 80 million on it first and like make it into something that finish it. But no, I mean, even as someone who sneered at the notion this would ever happen, I can say now this is definitively better than the other version. And for me, it's a B. Which I wasn't expecting necessarily, like I wouldn't have thought that would happen. But I think that with more material and watching it on television, almost like a series, like being able to sort of pause and come back to it over the course of whatever it was, 4.5 hours. I enjoyed it a lot more as a story. I still don't know if I loved what he was doing with these characters, and I still understand maybe why this became a dead end narratively or why audiences didn't jump on this. But I think that it's unquestionably better. And I think Zack Snyder's vision sort of deserved. I'm saying this publicly, guys. Zack Snyder's vision deserved to be seen. There you go.
Yeah, I agree. I have it as a B. I have it as a massive improvement upon what came out a few years before. I really dig the black and white, nature of the release, the additional stuff that was shot. It's very excessive and just kind of indulgent in every way that his movies usually are. But yeah, like what John said, it's definitely an improvement and unquestionably better than that film. And I think it really kind of fleshes out a lot more of the character arcs, the narrative that we probably would have seen. And you always wonder, like, now what would have ever come of that movie had it kind of gone through straight from A to Z. But yeah, I have this film as a B. Rana, where do you have it?
I have it as an A. This movie, I've watched it 2 times. I mean, that's a lot. I've watched it 2 times. No, I've watched it about 3 times. Watched it about 3 times and really enjoyed the improvements, man. I don't understand how you can salvage a movie that was unwatchable to something that was even in the A or B category. That's insane to me.
Yeah. You go from like D, where like Wonder Woman is kind of like the inverse, where like it was one of the better, and then 84, and then okay, so that averages out to a B still. So
cool.
Zack Snyder's Justice League's coming in hot with a B. And then another direct to HBO Max release. I think they did day and date with theaters with this by this point. They had James Gunn's The Suicide Squad. Ronald, where are you with The Suicide Squad?
S superior.
Oh shit. James coming in with another S.
James Gunn, you fucking genius. Somehow he managed to make this such a fun, ridiculous, over the top, crazy. I mean, the villains in this, like, come on. And somehow made John Cena just like shine even more. I already liked him. But this is the beginning of me taking him more seriously as an actor. This like, this man that's, has these motives to be this all-American guy, but also a piece of shit. I just love that. I love that these were imperfect people. And I think that's James Gunn's sweet spot, the imperfect character.
For sure.
Yeah.
I have it as an A. Love James Gunn. I like the way that they kind of, by now you've seen this film, hopefully, if you're listening to this ranking, but I love the kind of idea of the carryover from David Ayer's Suicide Squad and, the opening of the film, the way they kind of just reset the table with the characters that, you think are going to be a part of this version of the squad. And then, it's kind of just off to the races from there. You get a couple that stick around, Rick Flag and Harley Quinn, but I like introducing the new characters. I love Idris, obviously, in everything or most things that he's in. And I do think he's a lot of fun in this movie. Of a lot of the like IP big blockbuster types of things he's been in, like this versus like, I don't know, like Hobbs and Shaw as the villain or whatever. Like this is definitely one of the better things that he's done, where he's in like a big, blockbuster type film. And you're right, Dave. He has a way. James Gunn has a way of making these smaller, like kind of marginal characters in the comic book world way interesting and fun and engaging. And yeah, you get John Cena involved, who's a lot of fun in this, and it spins off into the Peacemaker series, which is arguably one of the better, if not the best thing in general of the whole DC effort. We left it off this list because we're just looking at the theatrical releases, but yeah, I really enjoyed the Suicide Squad. I wish I actually would have seen it in theaters. I did watch this on HBO Max, and notably, this is one of the biggest bombs of the whole DCEU, mainly because of when it was released. It did seem to have a pretty good audience on HBO Max, and with the amount that they actually release. But yeah, this is a really strong A for me. John, where did you have it?
It's a super high A for me too. I would say you mentioned Peacemaker. If we were including Peacemaker, it would have been the superior for me. I had it in my ranking just because I wanted to see where it stood, but it was definitely the one that I gave that would have been like a high A for me. But I think this is a solid, like Suicide Squad. I gave it a 94%. So I love this movie. I think that all the things you said, it's like using the math that I was just describing, where you start off with a general idea of where the movie falls, and then you start thinking about the movie. I kept adding things to this. Oh, yeah, well, I could add a couple points for that, and I could add a couple points. And then I realized how much, once again, it's that thing that James Gunn does, which is like, even if you know his moves and you kind of get his style, it's like, well, the thing is, they work when it comes to establishing character. And he has characters that talk like no, maybe not exactly like people talk, but the way that they squabble and the way that they find each other through the actions, of the behavior is telling the story is just really good, like really good screenwriting. And he always proceeds with like strong concepts about where characters are going. And if you're looking at that cast, you already mentioned some great people in this, but I want to mention David Dastmalchian as a guy that's like, has played like bit parts in lots of movies, and we already mentioned him. Well, we didn't mention him in this episode, but well, I'm traveling through time now. Forget what I just said.
Yeah, you did that for Messina also.
Well, yeah, it's right. Messina gets around. We were just talking about him in Air. That's
Oh, right.
No, I just think that those kind of guys who don't always get to play sort of a main character in a movie like this, and James Gunn's going to have fun on top of that with casting his usual group of people like that, in roles that you don't know. Like, you don't know when Michael Rooker shows up if it's going to be a big part or not. You kind of expect someone like Harley Quinn or Idris Elba to survive a movie like this, but you don't really know. And so I think that the way that he creates this atmosphere with these, C-string characters that no one really cares about, and that DC basically said you can kill anybody you want to, it really does make it even more wild to watch than like when he does a Guardians of the Galaxy movie for Marvel, where there's a little bit more adherence to like keeping characters intact as like IP and like out of love for the characters. You felt like he was really playing in this movie. And yeah, so super fun. And it's like, yeah, I'm actually looking forward to rewatching it after kind of thinking so much about it for this list. So.
All right, and then that brings us to Ronald's favorite movie of the year, which was Black Adam. No, I'm kidding. Ronald, where do you have Black Adam?
A C. It was, it wasn't a perfect movie it didn't change the hierarchy of the MCU. I mean, DCEU, but it had some moments. It had some moments that I enjoyed. The Rock needs help, though. If he ever is going to don a superhero anything, he has to let somebody else produce it.
Yeah. He's
too busy trying to S his own D, man. It's just like
he's in an echo chamber, like a bubble, like
yeah. And he doesn't read comic books. I don't think he watches cartoon. He watched There's a disconnect, and he said, "Oh, when I was younger, no, you didn't. You're lying. I don't think you consumed any comic books. It's okay." Yeah,
I have it as a C also. I feel like I went in, and I think it benefited from like very low expectations for me.
Yeah.
Like, I think that I really didn't have a lot of interest in seeing the movie. But I do think that, watching it like that and, being surprised how, entertaining it is. I do think it's pretty entertaining. And, compared to some other films, I think the CG looks better than I expected. It's still not great, but there's some really cool sequences, especially with Pierce Brosnan as a Dr. Fate.
Yeah.
That character I thought was really cool. And what's the dude's name? Hawkman. I thought his performance was a lot of fun. What's his name? Oh my god, he's on that City on a Hill.
Aldous
Yeah,
something,
Aldous
Aldous
Hodge.
Hodge.
Yeah, yeah, he's great in it.
That sounds
So
like
I
a
don't.
comic book character already. Aldous
It
Hodge.
Yeah,
does.
He should
right.
just be the Aldous Hodge.
But yeah, I don't
story.
know. There's a lot of cool. There's more cool in this movie than I thought there'd be. It by no means does anything to move anything with the DCEU, even with, the Rock's kind of forceful inclusion in the stinger and the credits and everything like that, and what that had meant nothing. Like there's no impact on any of this movie has on anything. But I gotta say it was better than I thought it would be. And when I look at our tier list, what's below it, it's definitely better than those movies. So I have it as a C.
Yeah, it's just firmly in my C camp too. It's a 57. And yeah, of all the things you just said, I mean, like I think that, if I was going to say that movie had nothing going for it, and then I started thinking about the things it had going for it, that was, Dr. Fate was the first thing I thought of. But also
Yeah.
just the idea of the Justice Society. I like the idea, like them trying to spread the world of what it's already maybe out there in the DCEU that we haven't been seeing. There's a way this movie could have been the springboard into some cool things, but I think it's fundamentally flawed to take a Shazam villain that most people don't know outside of being a Shazam villain and start positioning them as their own entity. That's like the whole taking on Superman thing. I mean, it was
Yeah.
just all wrong. He should have been the villain in Shazam and then gotten to build his anti-hero thing outside of that.
Yeah.
But the Rock was not going to let Zachary Levi swing him around or whatever. So that's why that happened, I think.
No.
All right. Well, that's a solid C. So there we
Solid
go.
C.
Speaking of Zachary Levi, John, where do you have Shazam: Fury of the Gods?
Another solid C. Just a failure on so many accounts to kind of like pick up the charm of the first one. I didn't hate it, but I think that it did do some really goofy things, and it's another one. When you're talking about the sort of like CGI slipping outside of the Zack Snyder umbrella, this is one of those that is kind of an ugly mess in some moments. I do think that the Shazam movies, both of them, have a sort of slightly harder edged sensibility than you might expect from these movies. Like people die horribly in these movies, and I think there is something kind of funny about saying that you're going to take this kid character and what he's going up against is always going to be like monsters that are like eating people or whatever. I like so yeah, I think there's certain things about the Shazam pocket of the DCEU that I do think I can see how it could have continued to hash out its own thing, but this movie didn't really succeed with with critics, or I guess audience ratings for it were not terrible, but it didn't do that well. And remember, this the one where he had like a meltdown on social media about how it was,
Yes.
or at least a very concerned monologue, shall we say, about what was happening with this movie. But yeah, this movie kind of failed to connect with me in the theater, and it seems like it failed to connect with audiences at large. So it's a C.
Yeah, I have it as a C as well. We talked about this on the podcast, but like my biggest take or my biggest feeling about it was just that I think what I liked a lot about the Zachary Levi performance in the first one was completely lost in this one. And I felt like it kind of was goofier, completely different than what Billy Batson was as a kid.
Yeah,
or as a
it
teen.
always was. Yeah, the kid's always been more reserved.
Right.
That.
And but like that spectrum was so spread further apart in this movie
worse.
for no real reason. Like I could kind of buy into where the first one had that gap. Especially when you think about like somebody who might be an introvert, who are a little shy, and you kind of get to be somebody who nobody knows you are. Like I could buy that a little bit in terms of being a little more wide-eyed and kind of goofy. But in Fury of the Gods, and again, like it suffers so badly from the CG stuff. You get some great actresses involved, Lucy Liu and oh my God, what's her name? Helen Mirren, and they're just basically wasted. And like why even get them involved if you can't let them be better than that?
Yeah.
But I don't know. Yeah, the movie was just kind of a pretty big failure for me. But Ronald, where do you have it?
See.
Damn. All right, so that's a solid C. Well, guys, looking at this tier list right now, this looks like pretty balanced. This is I think this pretty well represents the DCEU, where like there really was no true weight to it. You know, I feel like they're all over the place. They're pretty varied. I think our ranking is pretty consistent with audience reception in general, you know, box office turnout, receipts, and you know, the ones that seem to kind of rise to the top are the ones that, you know, I think audience probably identified with the most, or at least talked about the most. And ironically, the highest grossing one of all of them as of now, and I think will remain, is Aquaman, which was the only one to crack $1 billion, which is kind of crazy. But yeah, the last one, we're to our feature review of the episode, The Flash. Andy Machete's The Flash, Ezra Miller starring, finally got to be in a Flash movie. I was reading a Twitter thread, which I meant to send you guys, basically going through like just the production hell of this, of making a Flash movie at all, you know, not just one that was in this DCEU, but it's kind of crazy all the hands that were involved in the many iterations of what this movie was. But it's finally in theaters as you're listening to this podcast, and we'll do our ranking at the end of our review for that film, and we'll kind of finalize this list. But we were able to go see a press screening of the movie, thankfully. Allegedly the final version of the movie, after much back and forth about, you know, the studio kind of holding on to certain scenes and stingers that were in the film,
Right, certain surprises.
Like, at prior screenings, at like fan events, and the special showing they did at CinemaCon. But yeah, we got to see it last week. Ronald, why don't you start off? Tell us, you know, in general, let's just talk about the Flash a little bit before we put it on our tier list here.
Yeah, I can honestly say that I'm not a huge fan of Ezra Miller's Flash in other things, like in any of the other films. So I was a little hesitant, but once I heard it was kind of an event movie that, you know, implemented some elements from some of the other movies we saw, some of the characters, some of the, you know, Zod being in it just really excited me. That it meant that there was going to be some tear in this whole multiverse. And so, you know, I can honestly say I wasn't excited up until I saw the trailer. And once I saw the movie, it was much sillier than I was expecting. But I'm gonna throw this word in there. Fun. It was fun. I really thought that it was one of those movies that I'll probably watch a couple more times. I have a lot of fun with. It felt a little imbalanced at times. It, you know, the Muschietti sort of ridiculousness that kind of exists in some of his films. Just like,
yeah, definitely.
What the fuck is going on? Why are they touching heels to go? You know, it's like weird stuff. Like, it may be these single moments would probably be okay, but altogether it feels like almost bordered on Batman and Robin level at certain times. But the parts that worked really worked for me. There's some moments that I cannot get out of my head. And for that, I just think it was one of the more special of the DCEU movies. The emotional beats I thought were pretty cool. I mean, you know, I feel like the conflict is really starting to get a little weird. Like, why are we leveraging dead parents all the time? Like, there has to be another way to create emotional stakes. And I'm starting to feel like there's a smarter way to do that. That doesn't always involve like, oh, do you want to save a parent? Or do you not want to save a parent? Or do you want to do a thing? Or do you not want to do it? It's just like, it can't always be a dead person. Like, what if it just changed a love situation? That'd be really cool. You know, it's like, or kind of what they did with Spider-Man, where there was like that conflict with college. This is like a college thing. It was like, am I going to be with my friends again or something like that? So I don't know.
No, I think I agree with so much of what you just said, Ronald, that like Fun was the first word that came out of my mouth. With the screenings we go to, there's usually someone outside saying like, "What's your reaction?" And you give, I sometimes walk out thinking, "What am I going to say?" But a lot of times I just say the first word that comes to my mind. And this time it was, "Oh, it was fun." And way too much CGI, unnecessary CGI. There's moments in this movie where the CGI is being used to create actors who we know what they look like, and they're just standing there. And I mean, I understand maybe it's more expensive to get the actor there another day, but it feels like there was way too much of it's that thing of they're acting like the technology, we've said this before, but they're acting like the technology's there to do these digital
Right.
recreations of actors that we know, and just put it on a giant screen that's as big as a wall, and that you're not going to see the flaws in it, and it just doesn't work. And there's some moments of this movie that I would say are fairly ruined by bad CGI. I also think there are some really cool sequences that are pulled off via good CGI. So it's like it's such a mixed bag in terms of that, but the overall effect was fun. And I think there's a separate conversation that I don't know we'll ever have on this show about performers like Jonathan Majors and Ezra Miller, and what their personal lives have to say about the fact that they're in movies, and whether you're supporting people by going to see a movie. And I don't know that I want to have that conversation, but I feel like I really enjoyed Ezra Miller's performance in this movie. And a lot of the humor that you're talking about, the silliness, was pulled off via their ticks and mannerisms. And there's a couple different versions of the character running around, so there's some easy differences that you can tell between the performances. And I don't know that the technology was there to pull off the two Ezras in the room at all times. Like, there were some scenes where it looked good and some scenes where it looked pretty bad. But I don't know. I think there was so much about this movie that like it's almost like in a perfect different universe we wouldn't. And there's some other universe where this movie doesn't have
Some
all this
other
insane.
somewhere in the multiverse.
Yeah,
Yeah.
somewhere in the multiverse, it doesn't have all this crazy baggage of like, well, is the star a creep? Is this the ending of a failed franchise? What does this have to say about the future of anything? Like, who's going to go see this movie? I have no concept of whether this movie is going to perform or not, based on the way people may or may not feel about so many elements surrounding it. But my general feeling was, yeah, fun. And one of, you said, kind of more special movies, like there aren't that many movies in the DCU that feel like they tackle the sort of superhero world in a way that is like full of adventure. And like really the first stretch of this movie is some of the most comic booky, like bright
Yeah.
colored stuff you've seen in any, like I now realize, I didn't know at the time it was the 15th. In 15 movies, this is some of the most like heroes doing heroic shit that we've seen in any of them. And I think
Right.
that is a real problem with the fact that the Suicide Squad and James Gunn's movie are maybe among the more heroic characters we've seen, and we've seen a couple of movies about Batman and Superman already, so it's like,
Right.
this movie, you get a chance to see that version that maybe thrilled you when you were a kid, when you picked up the comics. There's a moment where Flash is doing one thing and Batman's doing another thing kind of at the same time, and it totally feels like, it's like from it's like the Super Friends almost. It's just like,
Yeah.
okay, and people bystanders on the street are watching them go by, and there's like a bunch of school kids going wow when they see Batman go by on his bike. And it's just like that feeling has been missing entirely, and it seems like
Yeah.
from this
Absolutely.
franchise. And I was happy to see it.
Yeah, if anything, I feel like a lot of what this universe did was like there was a lot of criticism of the heroes that we're supposed to love in these movies.
Yeah.
Like specifically of obviously of Superman and even some for Batman. But like yeah, I don't know. I really like the movie. Like I feel like it's not the second coming of comic book movies like a lot of people,
Like Tom Cruise thought.
Tom Cruise and honestly even James Gunn
Yeah.
saying what he said about it. Like
Yeah.
maybe he has to say that now that he's going, doing whatever, with DC films and whatnot. Um, I do think it is a major improvement on a lot of the movies that we've already talked about, and it's one of the better films, especially recently, that DC's put out. I think. I do think Ezra Miller is pretty incredible in the movie. Honestly, like I do,
Yeah.
wherever they fall in terms of judgment of what they've done in real life, which really is all that matters. Trying to have that conversation separately, it's just like it's always an awkward conversation. But I do have to say, like, I do think in this movie they make a case of like they are Barry Allen. Like this
Yeah.
movie's this movie really kind of works because of that performance, I think. And not only as the Barry Allen that's been seen in the rest of the DCEU in the amount that we got to see them, but like I think, you know, even playing another version of that character on the screen at the same time, and the nuance and how those characters are different, and learning from each other in the scenes that they share, I think really works in the movie. What doesn't work is a lot bad of CGI, like a lot of
Horrific.
bad CGI, like
including some cameos.
taking me out of the movie levels. And I honestly, like Andy Machete, like I feel like it's a part of his, like you know, it kind of follows him in a lot of things. Like as much as I love the It movies, especially Chapter One, I like Mama. Like there's always sequences in his movies that are really fucking silly and this look like rubber. And there's so much of that in here that at times I like was watching it in the theater with you guys thinking like, how does that get past? Like I know there's a massive conversation right now about the bottlenecking in terms of post-production, especially with the CGI workshops and all the different houses that these studios overwork, underpay, and just are so behind on by trying to meet deadlines. And that's another conversation, you know.
We're not criticizing the animators. We're criticizing the studio production schedule. Yeah,
exactly. I'm saying, you know, there's obviously means by which these animators and these artists create amazing CG. We've talked about some of it in movies earlier on in this extended universe. But I think that like this is a really, really good example of how bad it can be, you know, in a time that we're in right now, because there is a crisis among these, you know, CG FX houses. You know, like if you've ever, you know, if you haven't learned about this, please try to read about it a little bit. Like, you know, obviously they talk about Marvel all the time, but it's the studio systems in general in terms of how they interact with these artists, how they pay them, how they put them under deadlines, how they lack direction from the filmmakers that are making some of these movies. But in general, like watching this movie made me really think about that pretty constantly while I was watching it. And, you know, in sequences where the two Barrys are on screen, you know, it's kind of painful at times I said it to you after the movie. I was like, how are there like TV shows that have twins of the same actor that look like 1,000% better than this? And this is like a $200-300 million movie that's been in the works for years and being held for years.
That's, you know, two more of Ewan McGregor's most American performances. As twins,
or like Fargo. That Paul Rudd Netflix series. I always think about like that looks great, and he's in a lot of stuff, you know, together. But I don't know, that's really what knocked this movie for me. A lot of the nostalgia bait and like, you know, some of that stuff. It didn't knock me out. There were sequences in the movie where I was like kind of goosebumpy and I felt pretty special, you know, in terms of certain characters popping up on the screen. You know, most of them already are in the trailer. But seeing Michael Keaton as Batman again is just I think a pleasure.
I wish they hadn't slowed down to have him repeat so many lines from the first Batman movie.
Yeah.
Like, I wish that it had been a little bit more of a straight performance, because in the earliest scene he has where he's just kind of being Bruce Wayne, I guess. I thought it was great, and you know, I loved seeing him back in that role. Like there's something Michael Keaton does with his voice when he's playing Bruce Wayne that's a little different from his other performances. He has this kind of quality to him. It's not quite Jeff Goldblum-esque, but it is like he's doing a little bit of a smooth guy, you know. And I think there's a moment where he explains something to the Barrys that, I don't know, it just, that stuff was great. I really didn't like the repeating the lines part of it, but when you call it nostalgia bait, the Michael Keaton performance, at least I will tell people, I saw someone who said, oh, I want to see it for Michael Keaton, but he's probably hardly in it. I'll say this, don't worry about that. He's not hardly in it. He's a legit you know, secondary character in this, but he's a character in this. He has a lot of time to be on screen, and he, you know, has moments to play, even if they're not, to me, if I'm comparing it to nostalgia beats, I'm thinking of Tobey Maguire and Andrew Garfield in No Way Home, and I don't know that anything in this movie touches that. This is the movie that could have given us similar feelings, you know, with like multiple versions of characters and stuff. And it's fun. but it doesn't land with that kind of emotional heft. But I do think Michael Keaton is one of the kind of bright spots in this movie. But the combination cameo / CGI stuff that comes late in the film, I mean, there's a stretch that is just, to me, horrendous because of how bad it looks and how it's pure nostalgia bait, and how logistically, as far as the visualization of it, I'm not even really sure what I'm supposed to be seeing, like what it is that they are pulling off. I give them credit for doing something big and comic booky, but I give them almost like zero credit for how they executed the look and feel of those scenes. So
yeah, I don't know. Like, I think the story works for me. I like a lot of the emotional beats with, you know, the whole Barry and his mom. A lot of those scenes really kind of got me. And one specific one at the end of the movie really kind of, it did move me. Like I got fairly emotional watching it. But it's a weird thing because, like, it's definitely, this is the opposite of, you know, like the Black Adam thing, where like my expectations were like through the roof because of like all the buzz around it. And it's almost like there was no way they could have been met. And I do think this is a really good DC film. I do think this is one of the better DC films, but the expectations were just too high. And the CG stuff really, really, really bothers me. And there's some CG in it that looks really good. I loved all the Batman stuff in it, like the Ben Affleck Batman stuff in the opening is great. Maybe some of the better action and just like kind of quipping as Batman and any of the DCEU stuff. Very different from, you know, BVS and things like that. But really, you could tell Ben Affleck was like having fun in the scene that he's in. So that stuff all is really good. So I mean, it's weird. Like, I really did like this movie quite a bit, but that CG stuff is so weird to me that they continue to put these movies out that cost this amount of money, and it's so reliant on those things, and it's just like, it just feels like it's getting worse and worse as certain movies come out. It's just so weird. It's just so frustrating too. But I mean, it definitely is something I'd recommend going to see. I think it's really cool to watch in theaters. I am very curious to see how the movie performs. I do think it's going to underperform. I think it's coming out. It doesn't have enough of a window to really perform. It's coming out against some other movies the same weekend it's coming out. Elemental's coming out. Blackening's coming out. Asteroid City's in limited release. I think that the marketplace is so saturated right now. It's going to be interesting to see what this does box office wise. And, you know, I think that's going to dictate whether we see any more of Ezra Miller as the Flash. But again, I got to say, like, I think that they were pretty great in this movie as the Flash. So in that sense, I think it's a pretty big success for them and for DC in general. I think it's a pretty big win. So
I feel like every time I think about this movie, it went down a little bit for me because of the effects and because of the look and the feel of it. However, I will say that this conversation has reminded me of some of the moments that did work for me more. So, you know, I actually, before we actually got into our screening, I bought tickets to see it with Nikki and Henry. So I'm going to see it again tomorrow.
Oh, cool. Cool.
Cause they used to love the Flash TV show, and Henry's he's enough into all this different comic book stuff to be curious about what they're doing with this. But I had been thinking more about, do I really want to watch it a second time? But this conversation has gotten me back to go, yeah, actually I remember looking forward to seeing it again with them after we saw it because of some of those moments that did work. But most of what I've been thinking about is that unfinished quality to the CGI and the very unnecessary. It still doesn't seem like you needed CGI to do all the things they're trying to get CGI to do. But yeah.
Okay, so where do you guys let's get this in the tier list here. So where do you guys put the Flash on the tier list? Ronald, what do you got?
I have it as an A.
And John?
I had it barely squeaked into the A's, but it did. At 81, you had to have 81 to be an A for me, so it made it into the A's.
There it is. I got an A as well. Guys, we are like so on the same page about this stuff. It's almost like we record a weekly podcast together or something.
Yeah.
I feel like we did a real reality show host job though of talking it down a little bit before giving it an A. Like we explained all the reasons why it could have been a B. You know, why like, the effects really could have held it. Honestly, I was debating how much did the effects hurt it in my eyes? But then when I looked at what I had in my B section, I was like, no, I think the Flash should be given credit for the amount of fun that it does.
That's the exact feeling I have, which is I look at this chart, and this is good just context for the conversation that we're having, because you think about, like, we're comparing them against that B tier, which we don't have to do when we make these kinds of lists. But I do feel like when we talked about some of these other movies, it does put it in context for me about what works and what doesn't work. And a lot of the things that I don't think work in this movie are like kind of dressing, like the CG stuff. It's not really like the story works for me. A lot of the performances work for me.
Yeah.
The action in general works for me.
Like, the adventure is fun.
Exactly. Exactly.
There's that word again, fun, but it actually has like an adventure through line to it.
And that's what I'm looking for. I can, whether audiences really kind of are bothered by the CG, most probably won't be or don't care. But so that's why I'm just like, I can't not put this at the top or towards the top of this list, because I did have a lot of fun watching it. And honestly, I want to see it again. I am actually excited to watch it again. And kind of, go in with kind of clearer eyes in terms of my expectations, and just be able to watch it for what it is once more. But yeah, I don't know. Definitely an A for me. So here we go. We got the A tier: Man of Steel, Wonder Woman, the Suicide Squad, and the Flash. The B tier: Aquaman, Shazam, and Zack Snyder's Justice League. C tier: Batman v Superman, Dawn of Justice, Birds of Prey, Black Adam, and Shazam: Fury of the Gods. And at the very bottom of our tier list, in the D tier, we have Suicide Squad, Justice League, and Wonder Woman 84. To note, nothing made the S tier in the end. I know Ronald had Man of Steel and the Suicide Squad in his S ranking personally. I didn't place anything in there. I didn't really feel like there was like a, one of these really was like an all-timer for me. If I had to put one there, it would probably be Man of Steel. But I'm comfortable with where it's at as an A. And again, I think that I don't know. I'm looking at this picture and I don't really feel like we really did anything dirty. What are you guys thinking right now?
Same. I think the same thing, man. I don't know how this became so like beautifully representative of all of our tastes, but it
looks really good.
Well, I remember even thinking, and you expressed this, Ronald, but I was thinking like, oh, there's going to be some real divergence in this kind of middle area, but there really wasn't that much. The one thing I would say is, if I was going to have anything in the superior category, it would be the Suicide Squad. But like I said, in my mental canon, Peacemaker's up there in the superior section because of what it was able to accomplish. But I think, also when we're talking about fair or not, like, we don't do a lot of like worst of stuff on this show, but when you look at that D tier, Suicide Squad, Joss Whedon's Justice League, and Wonder Woman 84, those movies know what they did.
Yeah.
Yes, very much so.
They know why they're in the D tier. Yeah, we're not breaking any news by saying this. But it's an interesting little thing now. I mean, like, they're, like you said, Steve, maybe they'll move on with Ezra Miller. Maybe something from The Flash will hang over. Maybe something from Aquaman 2, if that ever comes out, will hang over. Or like, but they are starting a fresh thing. Like, what's our general thought looking back at the Snyderverse, the DCEU, before we move on to the DCU? That's not confusing at all, that the new one is called the DCU, which it seems like that's what they should have called it all along. But
yeah, it is what it is. I mean,
digress.
I think, like, kind of looking at this, I mean, I think it's pretty clear that they were kind of all over the place. I think that, I don't think, with the exception of maybe one or two movies and pandemic related factors, really like huge bombs at the box office. Maybe Shazam, I don't know, or maybe Birds of Prey. But again, timing on that was not great. But I mean, I think in general, these movies still overall made the studio a lot of money. I don't think it was anywhere near what they were hoping, or just the audience, satisfaction or happiness with these films. I don't think it was ever really met with what they hoped for, maybe with the exception of some of the movies in our A tier, specifically Wonder Woman. And I think The Flash will be a pretty big audience pleaser. I think audiences are going to really like it.
Yeah.
But I don't know. I think it kind of introduced us to some really great actors, actresses, performances, some takes on characters that I thought were interesting. And James Gunn specifically, kind of getting involved with the Suicide Squad and now being a part of DC Films and kind of shepherding what's to come. I think, and kind of he's extremely open and very engaging in terms of talking about what is and what isn't possibly going to happen. But the idea of Blue Beetle kind of being a character that's going to start that in some way, and that coming out this year, and then how or where or what impact Aquaman 2 or the what is it called, the Lost Kingdom, or I don't even know the subtitle of it. Yeah, like this, how that will be in or not in anything really, because of what they kind of have been trying to communicate about the Flash being like the reset moment.
Yeah,
and even he kind of is referring to it as that. Which, if you're interested in that, just to plug another podcast, we talked about it before we recording. Michael Rosenbaum has a podcast called Inside of You that James Gunn was on this week, where he talked a lot about the DC films, the films, in this EU that we talked about, and what's to come. But it's a weird thing. I think there was some great casting, and I think there's some memorable moments, some really iconic things that came out of this, and it's an interesting experiment. I just think now they're restarting it all from scratch, and maybe there's not the pressure of having to catch up to Marvel anymore. Maybe there's an opportunity for them to really kind of think about what they want to do and maybe how to make it more successful and have more longevity to that world that they want to be building. So
yeah.
I'm very, very interested, and I'll be there to see whatever comes up next for sure. What about you, Ronald?
I'm excited, man. The DCEU was, yeah, you're right, all over the place, but I had a lot of memorable times just watching a lot of these movies. Like I have a lot of feels about them. I didn't love
Right.
all of them, especially the lower tier ones, but man, I had a lot of fun. I saw most of these in the movies we did collectively, and I still, thought they were great.
Cool.
Yeah, I mean, for me, I think I said it before, but it's like I look at these movies and I see even the failed ones. So it's like there's a little bit of that. There's something instead of nothing there, and I appreciate that. I appreciate, even with Zack Snyder's style being one of those, take it or leave it propositions. I do think he had an idea and he had a take. And if there's anything you want to throw at the Marvel, if not Marvel themselves, but the kind of Marvelification of of franchise movies, is that there is a sort of emblandening effect about when you're trying to create this machine that keeps producing movies and is going to be a never-ending story. I kind of think that it almost seems better in retrospect that DC did something a little different from what Marvel did, but they tried so many times, as you said, to kind of catch up, that I'm kind of hoping, that maybe the James Gunn era is going to be more like, here's a bunch of movies we're excited to make, and
Right.
and maybe the faith they have in him right now will be borne out, and hopefully there'll be enough of a success that we can actually see what they have planned. But yeah, I for one am super excited about James Gunn's Superman movie. I just feel like that feels like such a good fit. I don't think he's going to do something that is identical to what he's done in the past. Even for DC, I don't think we're going to see a repeat of Peacemaker or the Suicide Squad in his Superman. And I do hope we get Peacemaker season 2. I hope they find some way to carry over any of the elements we like from this batch of movies. But as a franchise, I think, there's no clear lesson to learn when you see how widely, I mean, our list, it really is pretty evenly dispersed over the quality range. So it's not like there's one prevailing feeling about these movies, but I did watch them all. And for that, I'm proud.
I'm proud of you for watching them all, John. You made it.
Yes.
That was really fun. I'm really
It was.
glad we got to try one of these, and kind of, I think there's a really interesting way to like just kind of visualize and look at this on this kind of chart like this. And there's a lot to say about rating movies, reviewing movies, ranking them, giving them scores, whatever, however you feel about that in general. But it is kind of fun just to say, this is kind of what it looks like when you kind of talk about it out loud, and think about how we feel about these movies that make up this franchise. So yeah, we'll do this again soon. We haven't decided what would be next, but we're open to suggestions if anybody has any ideas or wants to see one for an upcoming release. Maybe we do a Mission Impossible one. That might
That'd
be
be a
fun.
one.
That might be a really good one.
You know,
But
would
yeah.
have been a good one. Would have
What?
been M Night when we did Knock at the Cabin. I feel like
Oh,
M.
yeah.
Night would be a pretty good tier list.
That would be a good opportunity the next time one comes around for sure. All right, cool, man. Movieschmovie.com is the website. YouTube.com/Movie Schmovie podcast. Again, the benefits of watching that YouTube and subscribing is that you get to see this visual element that we've been talking about and referring to this whole episode. If you've listened, hopefully we've described it enough for you that you could kind of close your eyes and picture it. What you can't picture is the visual of us all on the screen together talking about it while looking at it. But that's up to you. If you want to do it, go to the YouTube, hit subscribe, get the bell so you get notifications when we put the videos up. Otherwise, you can subscribe to the podcast on any of the big podcast platforms out there, whichever one you prefer to subscribe to your shows on. And we really appreciate it. Anytime you listen or watch any episodes that we put out, if you can review or rate or leave a comment, that would also be nice. And we would probably thank you in some way if we saw it.
If we ever meet you, well, thank you. Just tell us.
Yeah, we'll do it. But we'll be back next week. Again, back to a normal format with a required viewing pick. And
hey, Steve, let's do a 0.5. There's so many movies back.
We'll see.
We've seen.
We could probably scrounge something together.
Let's do a little 0.5 episode. Maybe get it out in a couple of days, just so people can hear us talk about some smaller films, some current films, or personal films. Maybe. I don't know. Just we
could probably put something together like that. Yeah, that might not be a bad idea. Maybe we can get some time together to do that.
Yeah,
I have no idea what that'd be like.
And if anybody watched the YouTube, they would definitely not see that we look exactly the same in that one versus. I mean, but that's just if it happened, you know.
Right. If people are tracking our T-shirts,
we'll see what happens. You know, keep the we got to keep the mystery alive. We don't want to open that mystery box quite yet. Yeah. But thank you so much for listening. And as always, you've made our day. Thanks.
Bye.